Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at number 6, O Come Little Children. This one seems to be fairly short, sweet, and rather easy. However, this has something that we haven't really taken a look at before. This has dynamics. If you look underneath the musical staff, we start with mezzo forte, or that stylized MF under measure, under the pickup measure. That stands for mezzo forte. And in the second half of measure 9, you see cress, or crescendo. And then in measure 14, you see just an F by itself, which stands for forte. And then 13, 14, 15, and 16, so the last two measures, you see a written decrescendo. Basically, if you've noticed as I've played the songs before, I've been adding in a little bit of a rise and a fall to the volume of the notes, just to help add a little bit of character, a little bit of draw, to make it a little bit more interesting, because I'm trying very hard not to use vibrato, which, considering the classical background, is super hard, because generally you use vibrato very frequently, because it's about the only thing, as per Saint-Saëns or Tchaikovsky or any of the bigger orchestral works, when you've got 54 measures of it's about the only thing that keeps you from going insane. So vibrato does help also punctuate and bring specific things out, but it also helps you keep from going to sleep when, you've got 2 pages of open fifths, basically. But try very hard not to use vibrato in here, because that's not really a technique that we've covered yet. And if you see me doing weird wiggly things with my hands, it's kind of hard to follow. So I'm trying to play this one very, very straight, comparatively, and using modulation within volume or dynamics is a very simple way to do that. To kind of give you an idea of basic dynamics, what you can do is there's 2 normal markings. There's piano, which is quiet, and then there's forte, which is not quiet. And then there's modifiers that go in front of or after it. The M, mezzo, meaning partially or a little. So MF in this case would be mezzo forte, a little loud. In measure 14, it would be forte, loud. There's also fortissimo, which is FF, which is really loud. And then there's fortissimo, which is 3 Fs, which is as loud as you can play. Piano runs the same way. MP, mezzo piano, is a little quiet. Piano, quiet. Pianissimo, 2 Ps, very quiet. Pianissimo, very friggin' quiet. So the entire gamut can really be summed up by setting your bow on the string and moving it as slow as you can, while still getting a definable note. That is identifiable as a C. That would be, by definition, pianissimo, 3 Ps. On the other end of the scale, you've got as loud as you can play. You set your bow, and you just... It's going to take a lot more velocity in the bow, but that's your boundary. You can modify that a little bit by running different types of rosin. You can modify that by running different types of strings, that kind of a deal. But one of the things that I did forget to cover when it comes to rosin is there's different types. usually the darker the color, the harder the rosin. Mine, when you look at it, I do apologize. I should have covered this earlier. When you look at it, mine's relatively amber colored. Yeah, so mine's relatively amber colored because spare packs of strings are always handy. And with that, it's a softer rosin. Cello rosin's usually on the softer side. Bass rosin's usually about as soft as you go because you need a lower flow point in terms of how low it melts. The lower the flow point, the more tack, the more grab it has. And when you're using a bass bow, you want it to have a fair bit of tack because you've got really long strings that are really thick that you need to get moving relatively quickly. So you want it to be as tacky as possible, or not as tacky as possible. You want it to have a fair bit of tack so that it gets that really long string going. Violins, on the other hand, have very, well, actually I don't have a strung violin, I have a viola here, but not a strung violin. Violins, on the other hand, have very small very small diameter strings that are very short, so you don't need very much tack to get the entire thing going. So that's why you'd use a harder rosin. Violas, a little bit longer strings, a little bit thicker than violins, so you need a little bit softer rosin than a violin, but not quite to the point of a cello because we've got strings that are longer yet. A little bit more tack, and then bass on the other end is going to be very tacky indeed. So you can use different rosins, have different tack points, and that will help you modify how quickly everything grabs. I wouldn't really recommend trying to interchange violin and cello rosin. Usually cello rosin is a little bit more just by dint of our instrument being stranger. And so I would definitely recommend spending a little bit extra money to get something made specifically for cello. Rosin's one of those areas that as long as you don't drop it and it doesn't shatter, you're going to be able to use the cake for a long time. Before I had my last cake knocked off the stand, I had it for a year and a half, 2 years, something along those lines. And then my stand partner walked by and clipped the stand, spun it, and it kicked it across the floor. And then it was in a bunch of tiny pieces, which are not really usable. So that's the different tack styles of rosin. And moving back to the dynamics, so I don't get completely off track. The both ends, very, very quiet, very, very loud, and then in between those are kind of your differentiating, one person's piano might be another person's mezzo forte, one person's mezzo forte might be another person's forte. It's all kind of indicative, or not indicative, it's all kind of variable in between there. So, again, let's go ahead and break this down phrase by phrase. I'll go ahead and play the entire thing, and then from there we can figure out how to do the arching and the coloring, and we can go through and play it. This one does have a repeat. This one's also 2/4, so it's going to be a little bit, instead of 4 quarter notes to a measure, it's going to be 2 quarter notes, usually meaning that it's a little bit faster. So, from the beginning. And we will go ahead and play the first 7 measures, because that's kind of the first phrase. And all of that's going to be at mezzo forte. So 1, 2, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. From there, we have the next phrase. Let's go ahead and play that first phrase though, because the counting with this one, in Go Talent Roadie, we've got 4 counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4. In O Come Little Children, it's 1, 2, 1, 2, but you count the ands. It kind of makes it into a 4. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And the problem is we have this this partial measure at the beginning. So instead of coming in on 1, we're going to come in on the and of 2 of the previous measure. So it'll sound like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 da da. So let's go ahead and try that, and we will probably do that intro a couple of times, and then we'll do that first phrase up to the first half of measure 8. So 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and do that one more time, and why don't you join me this time so that we can work on getting into the flow of that. So 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Okay, and now let's go ahead and start that first phrase for real from the beginning. So go ahead and join me. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. It's really hard not to use vibrato, I apologize. Let's do the second phrase. First time through, I'll go ahead and play, and then why don't you join me? This one's a little bit different. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Now, this is the part of the song that does have that crescendo. Starting in measure 9, I'd probably take that last half of measure 9 and all of 10 to come up a dynamic level. And then we're going to continue crescendoing to 14, which is going to be loud. And then all of 14 is loud. 15 starts going down into 16. Again, go ahead and join me. We will start from measure 8, the pickup of... the pickup to 9, technically, is how it's usually run. So, pick up to 9. We will grab that 8th note out of measure 8, and then be in 9. So, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and do that one more time so we can get a little bit... we can work on that. We can work on the dynamic shift so that we can actually get a little bit of a curve into this. Pick up to 9, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. So why don't you go ahead and join me, and we will start at the beginning. And then we will play the entire thing through, and we will go from there. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and try that just a little bit faster, just for fun. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. So with that, you can kind of, with that last playthrough, you can kind of adjust the speed to figure out where the bounce of the song is, where the emphasis needs to be. And as you could tell when we were initially practicing this one, you can you can work on something slower and then play it a little bit, work up to the point where you can play it a little bit faster, so that you can get, you can work on the expression of the song, especially since we're starting to add in dynamics. It will help in developing and moving that forward. So, why don't you go ahead and take time this week to sit down and work on these two, specifically focusing on the dynamics, and start paying attention to those and start trying to be able to shape your phrases with how we break down the songs. Try to shape your phrases into something that does incorporate dynamics. So, with that, thank you very much, and I will catch you again soon.